All right, welcome to Cheetah House on the Road. Today we are visiting the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. This is the library, and we're very lucky to have with us a special guest, Leigh Brasington. Leigh Brasington studied under Ayakima and has been teaching since 1997, specializing in concentration practices. And he has taught over 91 residential jhana retreats, so quite a bit of experience with the jhanas, which he's going to tell us about, and also quite a bit of experience with different people getting into concentration states. So he's really seen a lot of people. And so that's what I wanted to talk with you about today is there are many types of meditation.
Yes.
And one of them is ones that use a pretty high level of concentration, and those are also called tranquility practices, which I think. And
yeah.
so I guess my first question is, tell us, Leigh, why are they called tranquility practices?
Because they can make you very tranquil. It is helpful if you're tranquil when you sit down to start these practices, but the name really comes from the fact that doing them well will make you very tranquil.
Okay, so there is kind of a practice-specific effect, a cause and effect, that
Yes.
if you sit and, for example, follow your breath and sort of bring your attention to an object and have it rest there, that your mind will calm down, your body will calm down, and the sort of public idea, the public notion that meditation does calm you down is quite true.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. But that's not the whole story.
No, that's
There's
definitely
a lot
not
more
the
that happens when you follow your breath. And so this is actually a pretty common practice that many beginners actually begin with.
Correct.
And so what I really wanted you to talk about were some of the other effects, maybe that people, I think people really know about the calming effects, and they think of meditation as almost like a sort of glorified, relaxation technique.
Right.
Which to some extent, there's some truth in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that.
But so what are some of the, so we, as you know, Cheetah House sort of specializes in some of the more challenging states that can come out of meditation practice, which for a lot of people are unexpected and surprising, and because they don't know about it, they sort of keep meditating to calm themselves down. And
Right.
so I wanted you to talk a little bit about some of the unexpected effects that can come out of concentration practice in particular.
Right. At the start of every retreat that I teach, I warn students that if you have unresolved psychological issues, they quite likely will show up. Now, since I'm from California, there's a lot of people I encounter that have unresolved psychological issues.
Only in California?
Even on the West Coast, even in Europe. It's a common thing. I mean, let's face it, our culture has a lot of weird ideas about what it means to be human. There's an epidemic of low self-esteem in this culture. But whatever unresolved psychological issues that you have are unresolved because you're using your energy and your distractions to keep them at bay. They will probably show up at some point when you get really quiet because there's no more distractions to keep them at bay, and all of your energy is going into your focus rather than into keeping this stuff at bay. And it shows up, and it can be quite unexpected. It can be stuff that you knew was there but you kept at bay, or it can be stuff that you had no idea was there. And it's so common that I have to give this warning at the beginning of every retreat. And I say to people, you will have interviews and we'll talk about what's happening during your meditation practice. But if what's happening is your stuff has come up, that's what we're going to have to talk about. And
Can we get a little more precise and technical on this? When you say stuff, what do you mean exactly?
the fact that your mom loved your brother best if your tummy smothers.
Okay.
It could be, it's quite often is unresolved trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's often stuff due to what I call bad parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Your parents were doing the best they knew how, but they didn't really know how.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got stuff that just never got resolved, and whatever it is can show up.
So it sounds like there's quite a range, and
Right.
everybody probably has something,
Right.
but that some of the repressed material, if we can call it that, could be quite serious.
Right.
That there could be some trauma that it wouldn't just take, a day to resolve.
Right. When stuff comes up, there's sort of three possibilities. One, it comes up, you deal with it, and you go on with your retreat. One, it comes up, and you spend the rest of your retreat working on it. And then, luckily, the rarest case, it comes up, you spend the rest of the retreat working on it, and you go home and it's still there, and you've got to do a lot more work. And it may take months or even years to resolve.
And a lot more work may include other things besides meditation, that you might have to go to a therapist.
It probably will include things besides meditation.
Yeah.
Meditation, from my experience, cannot solve all of the psychological stuff that comes up. That it's really necessary to apply other techniques. And in the West, we have a lot of other possible techniques. This would be heretical in Asia, and maybe the difference in Asian culture is meditation can solve what comes up because kids are raised differently, etc., etc. But here in the West, very definitely, meditation is not the solution to everything. And in fact, there is quite a history of people doing what's called spiritual bypassing. They take on a meditation practice so that they can bypass dealing with their stuff. It does seem to work temporarily, but it only makes the problem worse because the methods being used to spiritually bypass aren't solving the problem, and the problem is going to show up, and perhaps in a unexpected and more intense way, simply because your mind has gotten so quiet.
So that's the part that I think is somewhat counterintuitive,
Yes.
and it still doesn't quite make sense. So on one hand, you start to meditate, and as your mind gets more concentrated, and to some extent you're getting better at meditation, your mind and body start to calm down. And so there's sort of a known effect. And there's also, even in the Buddhist, the way that these tranquility practices are described, they're described as sort of suppressing the hindrances, that they're good at that sort of suppressing. And then at some point when your mind gets calm enough, then sort of all hell breaks loose. Then
Right.
there's that almost the complete opposite effect, where there's all sorts of an unleashing of kind of psychological material that can be the complete opposite of calm: anxiety, fear, old memories, terror.
Yeah.
And that is actually, so the trajectory is like calm, calmer, calmest, hell breaks loose.
Right.
So it's not like going more and more and more calm. So I think that I've definitely seen a lot of people who have started to feeling agitated, feeling anxious, which is a result of the meditation practice, and then say, oh, I must need to meditate more. And they can increase their hours, 2-3 hours a day, and their anxiety and fearfulness is getting worse, and they're getting actually kind of neurotic because all of, they're having almost...
They're
projecting a lot of this material into the world, and
Right.
they're getting a little bit crazy.
Yeah, the stuff is coming up and they're not doing anything to effectively deal
Yeah.
with it. What they're doing is continuing to poke the fire to make the stuff come up by doing the concentration practice. If stuff comes up, it has to be dealt with. It may not...
In a different way, by not continuing to meditate through it. Is that...
Sometimes it can be dealt with by meditating through it, but that tends to be the stuff that's not quite so charged.
Okay.
It may come up, for example, and you're feeling really unworthy.
Okay.
Okay. The thing to do would then be switch to doing metta, loving kindness practice, for yourself. And it may be that you can work through it that way. But this is the stuff that's not so problematic. Shall we say it comes up and it's uncomfortable. But when it comes up and it's terrifying, you're going to need to work on it. I won't say in all cases, in some cases. There are aspects of the spiritual path that are best dealt with by continuing to do what made the terror come up. But that's if the terror is what we might call based on the three characteristics of the inconstant, ultimately unsatisfying, empty nature of phenomena. That you need to keep going. But if it's personal, you've got to deal with it in a personal way. So if it's old trauma, bad parenting, whatever, if it's personal stuff like that, trying to meditate through it is probably not going to be such a good idea. Furthermore, if you're going to try and work through the, shall we say, three characteristics, terror, anicca, dukkha, anatta, you really need to be in a retreat setting with a teacher that you really trust and checking in every day. You're not likely to be able to resolve this at home on your own. You're still going to need somebody to talk to. And the teacher hopefully can distinguish, is this just part of the dark night of practice? And the thing the student needs to do is keep practicing. Versus, oh, this is some psychological issue that's unresolved, and the student needs to work on resolving this and continuing to stoke the concentration and keep it coming up is probably not the best way to do it. It seems the best way to deal with psychological stuff is to work with it in bite-sized chunks rather than being overwhelmed with it and trying to deal with the whole thing.
So just to kind of recap what we've gone over so far, it seems like maybe a somewhat idealistic and naive view of the path is that your mind gets calm, and if stuff comes up, you just keep sort of plowing through and meditating through it, and that's what a good meditator would do. Right. So that's, we're saying, that's probably not going to be the case.
Right.
And that it's a perfectly acceptable and actually very common path to practice. Your mind calms down, material comes up, you switch to a different skillful means or mode to cope with that material, and then maybe return back to practice at a different time, or decrease practice during that time, or something like that?
Or a different practice.
Do a different practice.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really helpful when the stuff comes up to have somebody you can talk to. That's absolutely essential. Because you're in no way to judge what the correct reaction is.
You mean you as the meditator?
You as the person who has the stuff coming up.
Yeah.
You're busy trying to deal with what's coming up.
Yeah.
But you need somebody who has some perspective, hopefully knows a bit about you, has seen stuff like this before. Whether that's a spiritual teacher that you have a close relationship with, hopefully that's the case if you're on a retreat, or if it comes up at home and you don't have something like that, it might be just a good friend, it might be a therapist, but the figuring out what to do is best left to somebody that has seen this before. It's really hard to tell from the inside what's going on. All you know from the inside is, this is really bad, I've got to get through it. Right. As opposed to, oh, the wisest thing to do to get through this is. That's just not clear from that perspective.
Well, and I think that I know for many people that the calming effect of meditation without any problems was the truth for 10 years. And so it's a very hard habit to break that, no, I must keep meditating, will make this better, it'll make me calmer, it'll make this go away, and that it's very hard to get your head around that, no, at this point,
you've got
it's
to
the opposite reaction.
Right, you've got to deal with it based on what has come up and apply the correct antidotes. And if it's personal psychological history, it's probably going to be something other than just sitting there poking your psychological history. It's actually got to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Sometimes that does deal with it. It comes up, you look at it in the face, you see, oh, okay, and you get past it. That's not what you're worried about. Those people do fine. But if it feels like it's still there and continuing to meditate seems to be making it worse, it's probably good to do something else. And in particular, you've got to find somebody that you trust and that has some understanding of psychological problems that can arise to help you deal with it. There's no general thing that can be said. Oh, if you get a psychological problem in meditation, you should do. It was the scariest thing about starting to teach. I mean, I'm a computer programmer. I know what to do with a computer program. It's acting up, but for people, they're weird. And so what I might tell someone might be the exact opposite of someone else, even though they have fairly similar symptoms. But because I know something about their background, it might be different things. For someone, I might say, switch to doing loving kindness meditation. That's all you're going to do until our next interview, and you have to do a lot of loving kindness for yourself. Somebody else, it might be, I think you should probably go for a long walk this afternoon and not meditate until tomorrow. And when you do it for an hour. And if this stuff starts getting really bad, come see me, you know what's going on. You know, that sort of thing. So the varieties. And other people, it might be, just keep going.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, sometimes people might need to maybe leave a retreat or after the retreat spend some time with, actually a trauma therapist.
Yes.
But let's talk about sort of the intermediate kind of almost crisis management phase where there's a lot of material coming up and the meditator is getting lost in it and they're fairly out of touch with sort of basic reality. Like, what are some ways that people can get brought back? Just in sort of the interim before they can get really qualified help. Get
grounded. Okay, that's the key thing.
How do you do that?
Luckily, Jack Kornfield sent me to do somatic experiencing to learn that technique, and I took the first year of that. So that's a technique I can apply in an interview to help people start to get grounded and show them how they can do the same sort of thing for themselves as a grounding practice.
Okay.
There are lots of other things that are more grounding, such as eat heavier foods.
Like?
I've heard chocolate works fairly well, which is surprising.
But butter, ice cream.
Right. Yeah. Things that are a high fat content, and meat, which is often hard to find on a retreat. Do physical work. It's not uncommon on a month-long retreat to have to send somebody out. You need to go to the kitchen and you need to talk to the kitchen manager and find out what you can do for the rest of the day in the kitchen, scrubbing counters or whatever. Or you need to go talk to the head gardener and work in the garden. I remember one student who worked for the Forest Service, and I sent him out to clear a trail, and he was just so happy. And it really worked. It got him grounded again. So physical labor, going for a long walk, all of these things.
Talking.
It can be helpful. The going and talking to one of the staff about whatever job you've got to do. And you don't have the other yogis to talk to, but sometimes the staff can be helpful. It's simply in just giving you instructions and so forth. On a retreat, you're pretty much left talking to the teachers. There's not a lot of other people.
Who are kind of busy.
And the teachers tend to not have a lot of time to talk. But if it's, hopefully there's enough bandwidth among the teachers that if it's a crisis, the teachers have plenty of time for you. And I've had people that, I was seeing them every day because something had come up and they really needed that frequent help. If there's a possibility of taking a long hot bath, that can be grounding as well. So it's eat heavy foods, do physical labor. If there's the appropriate talk, you can do that. I've had students get in their car and go to town and, just go to a coffee shop and talk to people and so forth. But the getting grounded is the key thing if it's not something that more practice is going to help. And is more practice going to help it? The circumstances where more practice is going to help generally tend to be a longer than 10-day retreat, and the teacher has been tracking you very carefully and has watched where you are and knows, okay, they're just hitting the usual dark night part of the path. And they just need to keep practicing to get through it. But when something comes out of the blue, often it's like either switch practice, usually to metta, or stop practice and get grounded.
So the grounded part sort of reminds me of another thing that you said the other day, which was, again, I think this is a very common sort of half-truth, is that you're doing concentration practice and your concentration actually gets better. And I think for a lot of people, they're thinking, I will be smarter, I will be able to get so much more work done, and this kind of idea, which in some ways is true. But there's also an effect of concentration practice that can make you kind of spacey.
Right.
And you were describing like exactly what that's like. And actually, I think somebody read, I think it was a quote from Deepa Ma. Was it that?
I've forgotten what it was, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a quote where it was during Nathan's presentation where they were getting the loss of executive functioning.
Right.
And figuring out how to get home, and then they're standing in front of the door and thinking, I have to open this door. How does that happen? Oh, with a key. Where's the key? Oh, it's in my bag. Okay, and then and so multitasking and quick decision making like we do every day, like that's not online as much. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about like sort of the concentrated mind and like how it might not be as functional in sort of a fast-paced world as people might think.
Right. A concentrated mind is really good at doing one thing. Most of taking care of business isn't just one thing. There's finding your way home and getting out the key and opening the door. And that's several things there.
Seems to be pretty simple though, so.
It's simple, but you need to switch your attention to the next appropriate object. Whereas when you're really concentrated, you can just settle into to one thing, and that's all that's going on. There's also the fact that you begin, if you're on a retreat, to lose connection with, you're not getting feedback with how realistic your ideas are. And you wind up with what's called yogi mind. The classical example was a note that was actually given at the retreat center at Cloud Mountain saying, please call the local airport and ask the airplanes to stop flying over there, disturbing my meditation. It's a perfectly reasonable sounding idea if you have no feedback from reality. And a fairly hilarious example of yogi mind is the Vipassana romance, which there's a great video, 2-minute video of a Vipassana romance from the show Portlandia, which we watched last night. So you have all sorts of complete romances in our heads that are completely constructed, and also vendettas, right? Depending on your proclivities or conditions, which to some extent is how our minds work. But, exactly. Yeah. So you're in a space where you're not getting feedback from the outside world, and you've put yourself to doing a single task, right? And so this can make you a space cadet if you're not careful.
Well, let's be careful about that, because it's not going to make you a space cadet forever, just until the concentration wears off.
Right, exactly. Okay. Until you're back interacting with the world in a normal way. Okay. So you're a space cadet when you get up from your seat and you walk outside and realize you forgot to put your shoes on, or something like this, or you put on the wrong shoes. Or you do your yogi job only halfway and walk off without finishing it, or something like this. Okay. So these sort of things do come up, and it's mostly because your mind is really good at being with one thing without really getting the big picture. Being good with one thing and ignoring the big picture is a useful thing in the appropriate setting and at the appropriate time. But it's
so as a computer programmer.
Yeah, I did it 8 hours a day for money.
And it's good to be sort of completely absorbed in that one task.
Yeah, it was a flow experience. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe they were giving me money to do that.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah.
But I also I remember going to meet one friend for lunch several times. And after about the third time, she says, I don't want to meet you for lunch. You're a different person when you're programming. And it's true.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Our friendship was much better when I came home and took a shower and got something to eat, and then we got together. Because I was in this very altered state, having just spent 3 hours totally concentrated.
I mean, that's something I really wondered about, because I hear that computer programming specifically, you're sitting in one place, you're focusing on one thing, you're fairly absorbed. It has a lot of commonalities.
Oh, yeah.
And so I actually started to wonder whether computer programming had similar side effects, whether computer programmers started to have, de-repression of traumatic memories, whether they got spacey. So if you're a computer programmer and that's happened to you, I'd love to hear about it, because I think it's if this sort of theory about concentration is true, it should generalize beyond meditation. So
the difference is you have a huge amount of content when you're programming. An overwhelming amount of content to fill your mind with. All right? If you're just with the breath, there's not much content.
Okay.
Right, so there's that.
So concepts and images and words, that whole mechanism is being occupied.
Right.
But it's not being occupied when you're following your breath, and so it has a sort of side door to come in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, I would not think that computer programming would tend to bring this stuff up because of the huge amount of content there.
Oh, okay.
It's one-pointed in the sense that you're just dealing with this, and you're very concentrated, very absorbed, you're very much in a flow state.
Okay.
But there's no bandwidth left over for anything to come in. Whereas if you're doing the breath, there is a lot of bandwidth. That's called distraction when it shows up unintentionally. Right. And so some of the unintentional distraction could be your undealt with stuff.
Okay. So we have 2 so far. De-repression of psychological material and what we call loss of executive functioning, or sort of a higher order metacognitive awareness, multitasking type abilities.
Right.
Are there any other things that you've seen pretty commonly as a side effect, unexpected, perhaps undesirable side effect of concentration?
Those are the main ones. The loss of executive function, usually that comes back really quick. It's not a problem for very long. The other thing that comes up is more from insight. After having gotten well concentrated, someone has a very deep experience of not self, or of the unreliable nature of the universe, or the unsatisfactory nature of the universe, and it freaks them out. But this is part of the path. And this one, the instructions are, yeah, good, keep going.
Yeah.
That's the
and talk to your teacher.
Yeah, and yeah.
Check in.
If your teacher's any good, they recognize it, they tell you to keep going, and they also tell you this is an unknown part of the path. It's really good, this is happening, and if you need to see me, come see me at any point, so that you feel like you've got a safety net. That's the absolute key for stuff like that. But mostly it's unresolved stuff from the past that's really the problematic part and the most common. Well, the spacey is probably more common, but it's not really a problem.
Yeah, because it goes away.
Yeah. It's not dangerous, but the stuff from the past can be literally paralyzing if it's serious enough.
Yeah.
And it can have long-lasting effects, particularly if it's not dealt with.
Yeah.
I would say stuff from unresolved stuff coming up is always a good thing, and always an unpleasant thing. All right, it's unpleasant because, it's producing a lot of unpleasant experiences, memories in your mind, but it's a good thing because now that it's up, you can deal with it. It's there all along. If you don't know about it, who knows what it's doing to you subconsciously, unconsciously. But the fact that now it's up and you have a chance to deal with it, this is a good thing. It's important, however, that you do the appropriate thing for dealing with it, which may be to stop trying to get more concentrated. It may be getting grounded. It may be talking to somebody. It may be actually applying one of the myriad of Western psychological techniques.
So one thing I wanted to make sure that we say before we end is that this, if I was watching this and I had a very long, complicated, unresolved trauma history that I've been working on, and it keeps coming up every time I get very concentrated, I might have the feeling that I'm just not cut out for the meditative path at all. And I think that we want to make sure that we're not giving that impression, and that, like we said at the beginning, there are many types of practices,
right.
and you don't actually have to do this particular practice to such a deep state of concentration if that's not working for you, and that there are other alternatives. So could you say something about that?
Yeah, the most common alternative I find is metta meditation, loving kindness meditation, particularly for oneself. As I mentioned earlier, we have an epidemic of low self-esteem. So if you can do metta for yourself, not because you feel you deserve love, but just because you'd like to feel good, right? It's metta's not about deserving anything. It's that you'd like to be happy. So here you are in an unhappy state because this stuff has come up. The practice I would recommend is wishing that you're happy. Seeing that it would be nice if you were happy, and just getting in touch with those sort of feelings without anything about deserving or anything like that.
But, I mean, technically metta is considered a concentration practice.
Right, and I would say do it in small doses.
Okay.
Work with it, and when it feels like you've had enough, then get up, right? And if it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. If it's 20 minutes, it's 20 minutes. If it's the full hour of meditation that you plan to do, great. It will make you concentrated. If you find when doing it things are getting worse as opposed to staying the same or getting better, but if it's actually making things worse, then clearly this is contraindicated. The Buddha said the whole of the spiritual life, Ananda, is noble friends and noble conversations. It's incredibly important when stuff comes up to have somebody to talk to. That's the key thing. And the person needs to have a clear idea of what's going on, which is not easy because it's going on with you, not them. And they need to have some skill in helping you work with this. You don't have to give up meditation completely, but you've got to work on the stuff that's coming up diligently. And sometimes you need to take a break from meditation.
But there are other practices that are not concentration practices. So, for example, noting practice.
Well, that'll also get you concentrated.
Well, it'll get you concentrated, but in a less focused way, in a more open-ended way.
Right, yeah. So what they call choices awareness practice and the noting practice. The noting is more concentrating, I think, than the choices awareness practice.
Okay.
Zen shikantaza practice, Tibetan Mahamudra and Dzogchen practices are not as concentrating, and they can certainly be done, or they can certainly be tried to see if these practices are working.
And would you guess that would have less of the de-repression experience?
Yeah, the de-repression seems to be proportional to the amount of concentration. So the more concentrated you are, the more calm and collected you are, the more likely the stuff is to come up.
Yeah.
It's tricky. You want to investigate reality. That's what meditation is about. It's about seeing things as they are. And you want to do it with as calm and clear a mind as possible. You want to do it with as less egocentric mind as possible. So the calm, clear, less egocentric states are generated with concentration. But the investigation can be done even without concentration. And so while you're working through whatever's come up, then there are other practices you can do. The other thing about working through stuff that's come up, particularly if it's early childhood stuff, it has a half-life. You're going to work on it and you're going to get half of it taken care of. And it's going to feel like it's all gone. And then at some point in the future it's going to come back, half as strong as it was before, and you're going to work on that and you're going to get half of that taken care of. But there's always going to be a little bit left, and it's always going to be making appearances. They're going to be less intense and less frequent. But if it's something from, say, before age 5, whether it's just you didn't get enough love or it was something truly tragic, if it's left an impression at that point, it's pretty indelible. And you're just going to have to deal with it. But you'll get better at dealing with it, and there'll be less to deal with as it goes along.
Okay. So one of the messages that I've heard during this interview is that taking on a meditation practice in a fairly serious way without, like, completely by yourself is probably not a good idea. I mean, I know for myself, I mean, I read a book when I was in college and practiced every day out of that book and for years on my own with really no teacher, sangha, even spiritual friends or anything. So I think that's a pretty common trajectory in this country. I mean, you can buy meditation books at any bookstore. You can download CDs online.
You can watch videos.
You can watch videos like us. We're trying to help out here.
Yeah.
So
it's really difficult. Some things just simply don't lend themselves to book learning. And meditation, although you can put the instructions out, it's going to be different from everybody. And if someone were to put out the complete set of instructions, it would be such a contradictory mismatch that nobody could possibly follow it. So what happens is, okay, the teacher puts out the basics, and you go try the basics, but then you need to go to the teacher and say, all right, this is what I'm doing. And the teacher says, oh, you need to go to the right. The next guy comes in, having heard the same instructions, is doing it different, and the teacher says, you need to go to the left. So without that personal feedback of, okay, I'm following the instructions, this is what's happening, how can I tune it? It's really difficult.
So in a book or a CD that you download, it's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, which is a good starting point, but in terms of being tailored to what the individual needs, and it could actually almost exacerbate certain kinds of unbalanced tendencies.
Right. If, for example, you're feeling angst because some of your stuff keeps coming up, and you decide to take up meditation to deal with it, and you work on concentration to suppress it, you've accomplished nothing in terms of dealing with it. You've just simply repressed it, and when it comes up, it's going to be an even bigger explosion. Yes, you can start with the book, but if you're going to be serious about meditation, and by serious mean do it on a regular basis, it's going to be helpful to get some tailor-made instructions. And about the only way you're going to do that is to talk with people that have more experience than you. The Buddha made a huge deal about talking with more experienced fellow practitioners. I mean, this is throughout his discourses. It's really important not to hang out with fools, and to hang out with people that know more than you, and talk about your stuff. And of course you need to choose wisely who you're going to talk about with. Sometimes people can bumble along together and help themselves out, but it really does help if there's somebody that's seen some of what you're going through before.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is news.
Yeah,
anyone who's listening to this isn't news. But I think that it's difficult to find a teacher.
Yeah.
In a lot of places in the country and outside of the country, there aren't any.
Right.
I mean, it's literally they're not there. They're not available. So I'm hoping that maybe the new technology and internet will make teachers a little bit more available. In person's always better, but if you live somewhere very rural, that might be as good as it gets. So.
Right. And it may be necessary to take some of your precious vacation time, which in this country is far too little, and actually go on a retreat. Read teachers' books, listen to their talks on the internet. I mean, there's dharmaseed.org and there's audiodharma.org, and they have thousands and thousands. So you find a teacher you like their talks, find out when they're teaching, and take some of your vacation time and go on retreat and see if you can actually get some interaction with them.
And what's your availability, Leigh? Now that you're giving all this advice, you have a website?
I have a website, leighb.com, and there's a schedule on there, and I teach usually 7-8 retreats a year.
Okay.
So yeah, come on retreat. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right.